the influx of Islam?
The country's gone so far down the lavatory, I don't know where to start. These people coming to us don't embrace our way of life. They're coming for the freebie-weebie-weebies. There is nobody in this country who believes that Lucy Connolly has had justice or Tommy Robinson have had justice. Nobody. Unless you're a complete nutcase lefty being Islamophobic. It isn't irrational. It is a natural fear. If they want Sharia law or an Islamist society in which to live in, there are plenty on the face of the globe. And they know where they are because they came from there. If you look at the Ugandan Asians, they were an asset to this country when they came. The people that are coming now are not an asset, and they don't pretend to be, and they don't want our values, they don't want our law, all sucking at the tit. How much tax do they lay on us to pay for all these buggers? I can't help but think that how can they be welcome under those circumstances?
How would you have dealt with the grooming gangs?
Who else is involved in this? There are problems with senior police officers and senior politicians. Weird people, attracted to children.
The Starmer rent boy saga at the moment. Do you think Keir Starmer's a homosexual? I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Gold Seal. I use their products every single day, and now I finally get to work with them. I use their products for anti-inflammatory, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and mental clarity. I'm going to put a link to their website in the description, along with a 10% discount code for you to take advantage of. Go and have a look at their website, see if there's anything in there for you. I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and good health. Godfrey, thank you for coming on. Unbelievable to think that you really was the first person that sparked my interest in the political sphere, because you had so much personality that everybody before you were kind of boring, and I just couldn't really buy into the character. Then you come along, controversy, very much your own man, and people like you need to make a resurgence. So you was 10 years MEP.
Yes, indeed.
And you was an economist. If
Yep.
you can just, for the audience that don't know about your background, can you just touch base on your background for me?
Sure. I was involved in most of my career, because I was never in politics before I went into politics, as it were, for a specific reason, which was Brexit. So I went into politics for one particular reason, but my real career was as a fund manager. I've been involved in pension fund management for 40 years. And that's really what I did for a living in the City of London with various companies and then some consultancy work when I retired from that particular part of the world. So that's what I do.
And you're ex-military?
Well, yes. I make no claim to great military prowess because I had a rather undistinguished military career. But it was a sort of thing where chaps of my age, I'm 75, when you went into the city, I went into the city in 1967, and there's a few things you had to do. It sounds a bit snobby now, but it was all there for a reason. You had to play rugger, as we called it in those days, and you had to have some military experience of some sort because all the main board directors were ex-military from the war. They were ex-military from the war, and all the middle management were national service officers. So you sort of had to have some sort of bit of military kicking around in there in order to be considered a proper chap. And I was doing investment work as a very junior person for Lloyd's of London. And of course, the Lloyd's of London motto, as you probably know, is Uberima Fide, which, if you remember from your school days, means utmost good faith. And so everything's done on a handshake. And the stockbrokers is my word is my bond, because things are moving too fast to have any legal implication of commitment. So you had to know who everybody was. So if you shook hands with somebody, you knew they were what we used to call a proper chap. Now, it sounds snobby, but it worked because nobody actually ran away with the cash or broke their word, because if they broke their word, they would be ostracised and kicked out of the city. So maybe for the wrong reasons, but it all worked. Now, of course, the city's full of spivs. And lawyers are spivs. They're all spivs. And you can't trust their word, so you need to be tied up with regulation all the time, which is less than helpful because the regulatory authorities are all spivs. So this is one of the problems. But that's my background, is the City of London.
Yeah, the good old days where everything was done on a handshake. I I wish I could turn back time, or actually just bring those principles to the here and now. Just going back to the military, if you was a transgender woman, would you be able to join the military back in the good old days?
Well, we didn't have any transgenders, of course, in the old days. It hadn't been invented. So if you were a bloke, I have to say that the Women's Royal Army Corps had one or two ladies perhaps who were fairly butch. But generally speaking, and some glamorous ones too, and especially the Queen Alexanders and Wrens, they were Wrens in those days. Oh, by gum, they were jolly attractive girls as well. My mother was a WAF. She was a senior NCO in the WAF. My father was a fighter pilot. Funny enough, because being here at East Grinstead with you is interesting because he was here in 1944, being patched together by the great plastic surgeon Archibald McIndoe.
And the McIndoe Ward.
Yes, indeed. And he was here in late 1944 because he was injured in the Mediterranean, flying Spitfires into Malta for the defence of Malta. It's funny how all these things come together, isn't it, really?
It really is, yeah. I mean, the Queen Victoria in East Grinstead is, especially the McIndoe Ward, is phenomenal. World famous, yes. It's one of the things we're very proud of. And you've done a bit of boxing.
Yes, again, I come from a generation, of course, and you'll know this better than anybody. If you're my generation, post-war, I was born in 1949, sort of everybody sort of did some boxing. I did some boxing at school, boxing in the army, and these sort of things. People really think, oh, you did some boxing these days, but in those days it wasn't like that. Who hasn't in the army done some boxing? You know, you did some boxing, even if it was only at regimental level, or even company level, or squadron level, which mine was. And I was funny. I'm trying to remember what weight I might have been then. I think I was 10 stone 5 then, so it wasn't much of me. And so. Yes, that was quite amusing. But some of the guys I boxed with when I was in the 3rd Battalion, the Worcester Forester Regiment, were very good. I mean, we had one NCO who had actually boxed at the level he boxed Oscar Bodovino. So he was. Some of them had boxed to unbelievably international level at light heavyweight or heavyweight. But generally speaking, you know, you put the gloves on because you were told to put the gloves on by the Sergeant Major. Now, Mr. Bloom, sir, you know, we need somebody to go up against, we're boxing a group from a team from the Fleet Air Arm or something like that. So you sit on your stool. I remember looking across at this chap from the Fleet Air Arm, who I thought was an orangutan. And I said to my Sergeant Major, who was whispering by, I said, he's not my weight, Sergeant Major. And he said, yeah, don't worry about that. He's a couple of weights up, but he's no good. that's military boxing. No, he wasn't very good.
You'll be all right.
Yeah, I was fine for the first 2 rounds, no question about it. But then he did hit me. And it is possible, as you probably know, to actually see 3, not double. You can see 3, and I saw 3.
That's when you know you've been hit. But it does put you in good stead, all of that, for when journalists confront you on a staircase and start waving your own brochure in your face. You get to deal with them accordingly, which I believe you struck a journalist on the head.
With a brochure, yes, I had to put him in his place, impertinent fellow, and I got some stick at the rugby club for not actually decking him. I just did it with the brochure, but there we are.
What was he insinuating when he put that brochure in your face?
Well, he was looking at, there was pictures of all our all our councillors, I think, UKIP councillors. It was about 2013, I think it was. And he said, this is, you know, there's no, the only white faces. There's only white faces on this brochure. Now, I'd never seen the brochure. I'd never seen the brochure before. It was a new one. I mean, I looked at it and I said, what do you mean, only white? There's only white faces. I said, you're judging the brochure, judging UKIP by colour. I thought you chaps were against all this. You're looking at, what do you want? You know, what on earth are you saying? It's a racist comment. You're making a racist comment. You're just saying there's only white people. What about if you go to another political party and they've got lots of black people or lots of Asian people or something? If you go from Birmingham, the councillors, you wouldn't say there's no white people on there, would you? So then he followed me down the street and I was on my way to my club and looking forward to my lunch. And I didn't really want to talk to him. I didn't really want to talk to anybody. I just wanted my lunch. And he was in my way, he was in my face. And I've never understood why politicians put up with that kind of thing. I mean, I'm just a bloke from the rugby club. I'm not a professional politician. You trying to get in the way of, when I'm on my way to club for lunch, you do it at your peril. I'm as liable to whack you as not whack you. And I've noticed some interesting politicians now, American politicians, and perhaps Rupert Lowe to an extent, actually say to interviewers, and I did in those days lots of interviews with the BBC and Sky and all the rest of it. And I said, if you continue to interrupt me, I'll simply leave the studio. Your producer phoned me. I remember it was Channel 4 with Paddy Murphy or whatever his name is. They phoned me on a Sunday morning and said, could I come into, could I do this interview? And I said, yes, okay, I'll do the interview. And he wouldn't let me finish a single sentence. And I said, your producer phoned me this morning because they wanted my views on whatever the subject was, not your views. If you're already in the studio, now it's Sunday morning. I can go, I'm off for a pint and I'm going to have my roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. I can go. Now, either you let me speak or I'm going. It's of no concern to me one way or the other. You're not paying me. And it shut him up. And I was absolutely amazed that politicians put up with that kind of rudery. How dare they? If they invite you on, you're entitled to your opinion and you're asked questions. Don't keep interrupting. I saw Piers Morgan interviewed Tommy Robinson from a clip. A year or so ago. I can't remember when it was. I don't remember. But a year ago, 2 years. He wouldn't let him speak. He just harangued him all the time, and people wanted to hear what Tommy Robinson had to say. Whether you agreed with him or not, it was interesting. I'm the sort of chap who's go, well, I'd like to listen to the guy, please. Let me listen to him. I don't want to hear Piers Morgan, who, generally speaking, the whole world knows is a complete prat. So I wanted to hear Tommy Robinson. He wasn't going to let me hear Tommy Robinson, who was trying to make a reasoned appeal to common sense. And I can't remember why or how or what it was, but it's still on YouTube now. But I mean, it was a demonstration on how not to interview people by an overpaid idiot like Piers Morgan.
It's frustrating as well. I don't like watching big heated debates because you just hear a load of noise and you don't really get to the crux of anything, and nothing's resolved and you learn nothing. You just see people just like to see people fighting so my show, I like to ask questions I think that I'm naturally interested in, that the audience will be interested in, and that you'll be interested in talking about. It takes a fair bit of thought. Going straight into an argument is sort of an impulsive...
It doesn't help anybody.
Lack of control.
Yeah, it doesn't help anybody, no.
But you've now planted a few seeds. Do I go Tommy Robinson? Do I go Rupert Lowe? Let's go Rupert Lowe first.
Okay.
What are your views on Rupert Lowe? And what did you think about 𝐬𝐿 getting him arrested for hurty words?
Well, I've never met Rupert Lowe. I've only watched him on the box, like everybody else. A year when we had the election, I was asked on my channel, who would I be voting for? What's the score? What should I be doing? So on and so forth. And I said, well, it's rather reluctant. I said, but I think reform is the only game in town. I'm afraid to say it's the only game in town, and I have issues with them. But if you're going to vote, the others are so bad. The incumbent government, the Conservative government, is so bad. And Keir Starmer is so bad, and you don't know how bad he is, but you're going to find out if he gets elected, then it has to be reform. And one of the reasons I said that, I watched Rupert Lowe's parliamentary performances, which are one of the few parliamentary performances worth watching. Now, here's an interesting thing. As a fund manager, if you want to be a successful fund manager, and I was moderately successful at that, you have to do your homework. Homework is very important, and attention to detail is important. Now, you got that from Rupert Lowe, who was a very successful businessman who knew how to do that, and he's an articulate sort of chap and reasonably well-read, and his political heart is in the right place. So I had a lot of time for him. I have met Ben Habib, for example, only briefly. We are sharing a platform somewhere. I won't go into the details with that. Another man who is very well educated and very articulate. And I thought, we've got those two guys. And I rather like Lee Anderson because I think there should be more not the right word, but, working fellows, artisan-style fellows in Parliament. There aren't nearly enough people who do a real job who can put a shelf up. And I'm the first to put my hands up. I can put a bloody shelf up. I'm absolutely useless to that kind of thing. But we don't need 650 people who are totally useless and failed lawyers. So that was always a problem. So they had quite a good lineup. So if it was going to do a shadow cabinet, if the leadership was going to say, here's a shadow cabinet, they had the bones of a shadow cabinet that they could go to the country with at a major election, a Westminster election, in 3 years' time. It was looking like they were going in the right direction. Hello, and it's time to shoot yourself in the foot, isn't it? So they were good performers, articulate performers. They had to go.
Yeah, if you go back to Brexit Party and UKIP, which you was an MEP for, and now Reform, it seems to me, and all my audience, I would say 90% are going to be Reform voters. And I certainly don't want to disrupt the right, and I do want the betterment for the country. But it just seems that Nigel Farage has a habit of anyone that's in his party that's becoming a rising star, he seems to manage to expel them somehow, or at least fall out of them. Does that prove true?
Well, the track record is there for itself, and people can make up their own mind when they actually make an effort to look through. And of course, there's a whole new reformers. There was UKIP, Brexit Party, so on and so forth. So it's gone. So you have to do a little bit of research yourself and come to your own decision. But I do remember a cartoon. I remember a cartoon that I particularly liked in the 60s. It was called 𝐦𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞. I think it was in the Evening Standard. And it was quite funny because it's the sort of thing that chaps in the city like me used to read. That what's the funny thing today? And whoever was doing the cartoon really knew how the city ticked. A cartoon could be a very good way of exposing funny things. Anyway, 𝐦𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 was sitting behind his desk with a big fat cigar, and he had a secretary called Miss Finch, and he had a sort of squeeze box thing that you flipped on in those days to speak to your secretary who was outside your office, and she said to he buzzed through to her and said, Miss Finch, and of course 𝐦𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 is the chairman of the company. He said, I want you to find, Miss Finch, if you will, somebody who's bright, articulate, informed, and somebody who's a hard worker, somebody in short who is capable of taking my place and sacking. I think I don't need to say any more. Yeah.
So you spent 10 years fighting for Brexit?
Yeah, well, a lot longer because I was 10 years in office, but I was fighting for it politically active in that way, which was new to me because I'd never been before. And the people who was never been given credit for, the people who stood in the rain in the late 1980s handing out leaflets to people who didn't want to take them. It was freezing cold, and these wonderful people, some of the nicest people I've ever met, most of whom were ex-Labour Party, but patriots, ex-Labour patriots. And they worked really, really hard, but they weren't the ones that got on TV, like me and Nigel and one or two others. They weren't getting the glamour and all that kind of thing. But they were the ones that really worked at grassroots level for some time, which is true of all political parties, of course. It's only the people who get to the top who are normally, well, I can say dodgy. The ones that get to the top are dodgy. If you get to the top in politics, you're dodgy by definition. And I have a hypothesis here that if you get to the top of the greasy pole in politics, I believe that you have to be a sociopath. And the reason I believe that is I know of no other profession except perhaps the academia, where your promotion, as it were, or your advancement depends on you getting rid of the guy next to you. He's of the same party, he's from the same background. You've got to get rid of him. He's your threat, not the opposition. So Starmer, for the moment, the threat isn't coming from the opposition benches, it's coming from people lining up to stab him in the back. You have to be a sociopath to do that. Now, when I was a squadron commander, I wanted the best corporals, the best sergeants, the best junior officers in my squadron so they could cover up for the ghastly mistakes I was bound to make. So I wanted all these good fellows. I didn't say, I don't like the look of this young captain who's coming up, No, you wouldn't do that. And you wouldn't do that in the city. You want the best people around you because you are a team. Now, here's an interesting thing which you may have spotted. Most people, though, haven't. You will never find a successful politician, and when I say successful, I mean he's got to the top of his party or he's got ministerial rank or something of that nature. You will never find a picture of them in a team of any sort. None of them. So you would think they've all been to Oxford, or they've nearly all been to Oxford, which seems to be a university now to turn out the most miserable, ghastly people. What did you do at Oxford? Well, of course, we know David Cameron was on the piss most of the time, reading PPP, which is a non-subject. It's Mickey Mouse. If you want to get away with a skiving 3 years at Oxford, you read PPE. That's what you do. It's a non-subject. If you really want to be on the rack, you read mathematics or physics, where you've actually got to know something. So, but you think he had plenty of time. He played a bit of tennis, I think, Cameron, or something like that. And I think Sunak might have played a bit of cricket for the House. I don't think he got his colours or anything like that. But you won't find a rugby team. You won't find them in a rugby team, even the college rugby team. It's a contact sport, and they don't like contact sports for some reason. And they don't like team sports where you have to depend on each other. Successful politicians are dodgy by definition.
Well, that's my main concern with reform, because it seems, just from what I've seen, anyone that becomes man of the match, Farage seems to expel. And I think, well, what happens if Farage leaves? The whole party is going to collapse. And I think his personal opinion, he's got main character syndrome. He wants to be centre forward, where I think the country need a political party with a captain that build everybody up, and they want better people than them. And then you can delegate duties, surely.
Well, yes, absolutely. And this is the problem I think that Reform have. And as I say, let's get this clear. At the last election, I advocated Reform. I said people, vote Reform because they're the only game in town, with some reservations, before they got rid of Rupert Lowe and before they got rid of Ben Habib. And before they brought in Hope Not Hate to select candidates, and before they brought in that plumber chap who was totally anti-Brexit, who suddenly got, why was he recruited, one wonders. So I don't really understand why all that happened. But really, the question that somebody said, well, if you're going to be Prime Minister, and the polls say that it's a likely chance that you might become Prime Minister, and you might form a government in Westminster, all of which is a reasonable comment the way things are going at the moment. Who would be your shadow cabinet? And the response was, I can't, I've only got 5 or 6 MPs or whatever it was, so I can't possibly form a shadow cabinet, can I, with only six MPs. Now, you see, that is a really hopeless strategic answer. That is so deeply flawed, it beggars belief. And this goes back to the UKIP days. Well, OK, we had 11 or 12 MEPs, or 14 right at the end, 14. We went down to 5 at the end, of course, by the second term, because everybody else had buggered off. But the thing is, if you're asked that kind of question, you shouldn't be fishing for your ministers in that very small pond. Give an example of that in UKIP. We had a very articulate surgeon in Edinburgh, I think in mid-30s, very articulate fellow, UKIP member. So if you had an expanded thinking range, what you would do is say, well, he's going to be my shadow NHS spokesman. Andrew Neil will be in front of a young, successful surgeon at an Edinburgh infirmary. Now, Andrew Neil wouldn't have the nerve to challenge anything the guy was saying about, what's it like at the coalface when it comes to the NHS. He wouldn't dare. And we had another guy who was a recently retired Royal Naval captain, a submariner, I think it was, which is the corps d'elite in the Royal Navy. Well, I've got my Ministry of Defence. I've got my Minister of Defence, who's a recently retired Royal Naval captain of 50 years old. That's the answer that I would have given. Not, no, I don't think we're going to start talking about shadow cabinets at the moment. And of course, the credibility went. That was in 2014. In 2015, they had no credibility in a Westminster election because there was no shadow cabinet. So they didn't win a single seat. So that was bound to happen. This is the problem. Reform have to go into a Westminster election with a team. They have to. Otherwise, they will fail again because the Conservative Party won't die forever. Sooner or later, they'll get their act together. They've got a long way to go at the moment. They need to get rid of a lot of people and start again, which I could actually explain how that can be done in 2 minutes, if anybody from the Conservative Party is listening. What you could do is you hand back the selection of your MPs to your constituency party. So the people, for example, in Howden and Horton Price, which is my constituency, which has David Davis, who's altogether not a bad fellow, incidentally, But if it doesn't matter where it is, North Yorkshire or West Midlands or whatever it happens to be, you give it to this constituency party there, and they recruit a local man. So he's a local doctor, he's a local solicitor, he's a local artisan, a local businessman. It doesn't matter. You do not need Smith Square telling you who to parachute into your constituency. And so you would then have people coming forward who would be very well known to the constituency party as being a good, articulate guy and hardworking guy, not somebody who's been flown in because he's a mate of somebody in Smith Square. And that means that you would have candidates worthy of their corn, as it were. They're selecting candidates who are woke over the heads of local businessmen and all the rest of it, who people would vote for. And that's the demise of the Conservative Party. They stopped being Conservative, which is why they got murdered at the last election, and rightly so.
Was it Cameron that was encouraging the influx of Islam?
Oh, yes. I mean, he's on. I reposted a clip of his just a couple of weeks ago. He's saying we must welcome Muslims. We must say they're going to be welcome here. They've got lots of friends here. They've got lots of this. I don't know. The clip is on my website. He was actually encouraging Muslims to come. And we're supposed to be a constitutional monarchy. We're supposed to be a parliamentary democracy. And of course, there are some immigrants who are welcome. I'm not anti-immigration, by the way. Not at all. I married into a Polish family. My father-in-law was Polish. He was a tank commander in the war and finished up here in this country in 1945. Good people, hard-working people. They came here to work. And, of course, there's lots in Yorkshire and lots with funny names who've been there 2 or 3 generations. My nephew, of course, on my wife's side, has got a very funny Polish name. He was captain of under-18 Yorkshire Rugby. He's an underwriter at Lloyd's. You don't get more English than he is because they assimilate. They assimilate. If you come here and you have a different basis of law, you have Sharia law, you have a different religion, you have a different attitude to women. I mean, Yorkshire's pretty misogynistic, I have to say, in a rather nice and charming way.
Is that why you moved there?
So all that's good. And of course, you can have a few. You can have a few Muslim doctors. You can have a few Hindu doctors. And Hindus used to have the corner shop, and very helpful they were, very nice, very charming, and they come into the community. It's not a problem. What you can't have is whole towns like Birmingham or Southall or Bradford turned up to completely alien cultures. And I don't fall into the trap of trying to suggest that our culture of Christianity and parliamentary democracy is better than anybody else's system of government. I don't claim that because I think that's a rabbit hole that you can't go down. There's no point in going down that rabbit hole. The point is, if they want Sharia law, if they want a Muslim or Islamist society in which to live in, there are plenty on the face of the globe, and they know where they are because they came from there. So why does everybody want to come here if they don't want our law, they don't want our protections? And people don't understand this. If you look at America, which is a classic case of the United States, people fled poverty and oppression, all the rest of it, from Eastern Europe and places like towards the end of the 19th century to come to. They landed, of course, in New York, that famous town of the "Give me your huddled masses" and all that kind of thing, which you'll see, of course, everybody knows about in New York. They came to work and build, and you got some great names there who were second generation, Broccoli, for example, second generation Italian, who ran all the Bond films. You know, he was the producer of his Bond films, and his daughter now does them. So these people came to work and work hard, and they did work very, very hard indeed in very difficult circumstances. They came to work and they embraced America, the American way of life. These people coming to us don't embrace our way of life. They're coming for the freebie weebie weebies. That our tax paid for. No, thank you.
It's frustrating to see. I mean, for you to have seen it over the decades, I mean, has there been a societal decline since Islam's been on the rise? Or mass migration? Or a bit of both?
I think it's impossible for any society to sustain itself if they have very high numbers of people coming in who don't buy into the ethos of the country that they're visiting. It doesn't matter whether it's this country or anybody else. And I think that's a great mistake. And you can look back at, but look back at a few things. Let's look at the Windrush with the West Indies. They were Christians, and they had a very Christian view of life. And they were workers, they were hard workers, and I remember them all. And I had a neighbour. I lived in my first little masonette I bought in 1971 near Hither Green Station. And there was a bus driver who just bought his house, obviously older than me, with a few kids. A charming man. They were Baptists. They were really, really nice people. Who could argue that they weren't welcome? You couldn't argue they weren't bringing an alien culture. They just happened to have a black skin, but the culture was the same, pretty much the same as ours. And same as if you go to Jamaica now. I went to church 2 years ago. I was in Jamaica and I went to the local church. The most charming people. So you can't say that they're not welcome if they come to work, and they did come to work. So, but we haven't had that with those from the Indian subcontinent, but it doesn't have to be that way. If you look at the Ugandan Asians that came across, they were very, very entrepreneurial when they were kicked out, and they built a completely different community in no time at all, a very entrepreneurial community. They were an asset to this country when they came. The people that are coming now are not an asset, and they don't pretend to be, and they don't want our values, they don't want our law, and they don't want our religion, they don't want anything. I just don't know why they're here. So I can't help but think that how can they be welcome under those circumstances?
Have you been affected by any of the migrant hotels where you live?
Well, we don't really have any hotels where I live. I live a little village in the middle of nowhere.
Lovely.
We do have one in the constituency in which David Davis was desperate to try and stop happening because it wasn't a suitable hotel at all. But you see, that's not the point. It's not the point. If you they're all young men. I mean, they're all young men in their 20s. They're full of testosterone and all that kind of stuff. And they've got nothing to do, idle hands, and the devil will make work for them, and indeed the devil does. You can't put lots of young men into these hotels with nothing to do. They'll find mischief. It's not a question of black or white or green or yellow. All young men will find mischief of that age if they've got nothing to do and they're herded together. That is just a fact of life. And I suspect when I was in my early 20s, I was absolutely no different. I was a bit of a scallywag. And there we are. But we lived in a more disciplined society. So it didn't get out of hand. But the way we're dealing with it at the moment, and of course, nothing I learnt when I was in office for Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire was sometimes I was called in to try and help if you had neighbours from hell. Antisocial neighbours. And it was interesting, good people on council estates, good hard-working people with neat little gardens and all the rest of it, they could be in terrible distress because neighbours from hell, druggies and crooks and all the rest of it, these people, they could taint a whole neighbourhood. Not this street, the street behind it, and the street then. You could suddenly find yourself in sort of a quarter of a square mile of people who were suffering from these dreadful people. The police aren't interested because I attended one of these things, in to talk to people and get people together, and I got the chief constable in. Chief constable was absolutely useless. So we had a big public debate about it. This was in Grimsby, I think, in 2010 or whenever it was, doesn't matter, but round about then. And I had to say to him, it was a packed hall. I said, the trouble is, the reason you're not interested, Chief Constable, is because you live in 𝐾𝐿𝐵𝐿𝐵, which is a really posh suburb of Hull, with a nice big house and nice big gardens. And I said, frankly, Chief Constable, you don't give a shit, because these are working class people, and you don't care what happens to working class people, because you're on a huge salary with an index-linked pension living in a posh house in 𝐾𝐿𝐵𝐿𝐵. You just don't care. And of course, we're not drawing our police from the right. The old-fashioned police would come from those communities, and they would probably have some military service, national service or something like, maybe military, whatever it happened to be. They didn't suddenly become a policeman at 18 years old. I mean, you can't think of anything more ridiculous than a policeman of 18 years old, which is why we've got the police service that we have now, because we don't draw them properly from the community, and they're not properly trained, and they don't know the law. They're embarrassingly bad. And of course, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, it was well known. It was rightly well known that the British police were the best in the world. There was no question about it. Other police forces acknowledged it, that they were the best in the world, because they were drawn from the communities they policed, and they were simpatico. And and people were fairly simpatico with the police as their protectors. Nobody feels that way now. I look at a policeman now and I think he's a threat. He's going to want to know if there's something wrong with my car, if I had done any tweetyverse. The last time I saw a policeman, no, last two times or something, one was came round because somebody had an anonymous complaint about a tweet I'd made in Scotland, and he came round the back of the house and knocked on the back door.
You've had the police at your door for tweets.
Yeah.
And another one like Lucy Connolly.
Indeed. Fortunately, I put a toe cap up his arse. So that might work with somebody with no money from a council estate who don't know anything or who've been told by the state solicitor to plead guilty. I said, don't try that with me.
What did you tweet that nearly got you nicked?
I can't even remember. It was totally and utterly harmless. But anyway, but you see, the thing is, you need to be a man of some education or substance to put a flea in a policeman's ear, don't you? So if you're now terrified, the police have come round and you see the court solicitor says the best thing you can do is keep your head down, plead guilty, and and they'll go, which is what Lucy Connolly did.
I couldn't believe that they charged her and imprisoned her for incitement because the tweet read at the end, "For all I care." She was sort of at the end of her tether, a throwaway comment, "For all I care."
Yeah.
And my cousin actually said to me on the train reading the article, he said, "I think she pled guilty." I thought, no.
They all pleaded guilty.
But she did plead guilty. I mean, what are your thoughts on our free speech being completely taken away from us?
Just go back historically. If you go back to the days of in the 1700s, Voltaire, when there was a lot of pressure from the things like the Inquisition, and the France was Catholic, and there was a lot of religious wars and stuff like that, and the Huguenots, and so it goes on and goes on. If you read your history book, and Voltaire came, and Victor Hugo, I think, came to England at that time and wrote essays about how wonderful it was to be able to actually write what you want, to say what you want without threat from the state. Now, it wasn't perfect in those days, I know that, rose-tinted spectacles here. But generally speaking, we've always been a country of free speech. And when I was a lad, of course, people used to have, there was a phrase, it's a free country. Nobody uses that now. Who would use the phrase, it's a free country?
Yeah, not me.
Nobody uses it now. It's gone out of fashion because it's not a free country. And we have to be put right by Vance in America saying it's now a police state. But now I'd like to just cover something here which hasn't been brought up because we've only had these things in the last couple of days. Not the last couple of days, but it's come to a head in the last couple of days with Tommy Robinson and Lucy Connolly and so on and so forth. Now, here's something that I say. It was a long time since I did my law exams. It was the 60s, but certain things haven't changed. The principles of English law haven't changed. Statute law changes. So I would argue that the Court of Appeal do not understand the principles of English law, not in principles of common law. So people say, oh, it's the law, what can they do? It's the law. And they wrong. They are wrong. He doesn't understand the law. He's a pseudo-politician. I'll tell you what the law is, and if you're listening, Attorney General, whatever your name, whatever you do, Holroyd or something, whatever it is, listen in while I school you on this. If you go back to your 1930s common law, it was decided in common law that what justice is, justice, and the law should reflect justice, incidentally. Otherwise, what is the point of it? If you want justice, what is law? What is justice? And this is enshrined in common law by, I'm not sure whether it's obiter dicta or not, but it's certainly in common law in the 1930s. And the judge made the observation, he said, justice is what is deemed to be fair by the man on the Clapham omnibus. There is nobody in this country who believes that Lucy Connolly has had justice or Tommy Robinson have had justice. Nobody, unless you're a complete nutcase lefty or some sort of psycho. And let's be honest, there's enough psychos in government at the moment. So it's wrong in law. It's wrong in law because, and I would like to see an appeal launch I would like to see an appeal to the king, useless king though he may be, an appeal to the king because he does have a much bigger role in constitutional law than most people imagine, that Lucy Connolly's treatment and Tommy Robinson's treatment is against law because they are not being treated in a way which would be deemed fair by the man on the Clapham omnibus. And of course, the man on the Clapham omnibus now is your citizen. You know, it's just your ordinary citizen, as it were. Nobody could possibly argue that. And so consequently, I would argue that the Court of Appeal, I'm not sure, they went to the Court of Appeal, and I'm not sure that the argument was the right one that they used. I think they should have used a common law argument for natural justice, and I think they might have been on much stronger ground. And I do not know enough of the law now, because things have changed, to appeal to the king to grant a pardon on the basis that it is a breach of common law. I'd like to see the whole thing looked at again. And that's in sentencing policy, you see. You might be guilty of that breach of law. Yes, okay, maybe. But is it natural justice then to suffer solitary confinement for a long time in Tommy Robinson or Lucy Connolly or the guy that they let out of Belmarsh who was in there for 6 years? Name escapes me for a minute. It's just it just is not wrong. The punishment has to fit the crime, and you can go back to Gilbert and Sullivan. The punishment has to fit the crime. Let the punishment fit the crime. And W.S. Gilbert, of course, was a very well-known liberal politician, not elected politician, a very well-known liberal supporter in the days when liberal was the word that we wanted. You know, that liberal should mean. It doesn't mean now. Liberal now means nutcase, psycho nutcase. Lock them all up. No, liberal means live and let live. Yeah. Or as the Germans say, leben und let leben. Get out of my face, government. We don't want you. And that, of course, goes back to Austrian school economics, as I introduced myself a bit. What is Austrian school economics? It's a concept which was introduced by Karl Menger and von Mises before the war, in Germany, which is basically Austrian school economics is we don't want government, we don't want regulation, we don't want all this government, so leave me alone. Leave us alone to do our own thing, and if you're not hurting somebody else, if you're not physically hurting somebody else, pretty much anything goes, or inciting somebody to burn things down or whatever it happens to be. Generally speaking, be left alone. And when I was very new to politics, I was campaigning. I was at Leeds Airport, and I was just been elected about a month or two, and I was in the car park. And the car park attendant guy there said to me, he recognised me because I'd been doing some TV and all the rest of it, and it was the heart of Yorkshire, Leeds Airport and stuff like that. He said, "Oh, Mr. Bloom, I saw on the telly yesterday." He said, and it was just about the smoking ban. The smoking ban was just coming in.
When was that, 2009?
Something like that, yeah. And he said, "Mr. Bloom, why can't they just leave us alone? Why can't they just leave us alone?" And that's my watchword as a politician and a commentator now on politics and economics. Leave us alone.
Well, you mentioned crime, and it made me think of a crime, actually, and I'm certainly not condoning setting fire to people's houses, nor am I homophobic. But with those two things in mind and the Starmer rent boy saga at the moment, do you think Keir Starmer's a homosexual?
Let's say I was a betting man. Sometimes I have a flush on the Grand National. I would put him as a homosexual 10-1 on, all right? 10-1, yeah. I would be staggered if he wasn't. But I don't mind that. I don't mind him being a homosexual. I'm not a homophobe, and homophobe is a misderivation of the Greek. Phobe, being a phobe or acrophobe or whatever, or claustrophobia is an unnatural fear of something. Well, sometimes being Islamophobic, it's a natural fear. It isn't irrational. It is a natural fear. It doesn't make you a madman. But so the question is, I don't much care if he's a homosexual or not. I just wish he was a human being.
I mean, this is going to sound a bit out there, but you've seen over the course of time how things can change very quick. Do you think there's a possibility that we could be heading for a civil war?
Well, it's another interesting question. And I've always taken the view, historically, and I'm a very keen historian, nobody goes to the barricades with a full tummy. Nobody goes to the barricades if they've got a little house or a little flat or a little car. It's only when the situation you get a civil war where it's really gone beyond what people can actually bear. And it's generally speaking about ordinary people being crushed under the iron heel. Certainly the French Revolution was the same. Implications of that in the Spanish Revolution. We've had civil wars. A lot of people think we've only had one. We haven't. You can go back to the time of King Stephen. But people always think of Oliver Cromwell and the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. That really was the King Charles I, behaving in such an autocratic way, which was against the concept of kingship at the time, even since King Henry II. So, and with ship tax and taxes and non-representation, all things going, and eventually the people who didn't have a particularly full belly, they didn't have a particularly big house. And then, of course, you had people who took a religious view because they were Roman Catholic phobic, if I can say that. So civil war, nobody ever wins from a civil war, really. Nobody ever really wins. It's very difficult to point to a country which benefited from a civil war. And of course, in France, when people say, well, France, what happened in France? Well, they just got rid of, King Louis, and they got Napoleon, Emperor Napoleon, who just made himself king and made all his cousins, his sisters and aunts, he made them all princes and princesses. It all bounces back. So I think what we need, rather than a civil war, is a coup. A coup. But of course, all our army officers, the sort of people who would run a coup, are woke. So you cannot get above, believe me, I saw this coming, well before anybody invented the word woke. I saw this coming. It is impossible to be promoted in the army above lieutenant colonel unless you are woke. You just won't go further. And I'm a graduate of the Royal College of Defence Studies relatively recently. 2010, I think it was. You cannot be promoted unless you believe that you can recruit trans, you can do this, and you can do the other. And the Navy is the same, and the Air Force is the same. It's all part and parcel of wokery. When I spoke to a retired fast jet pilot instructor, they're trying to say we need more women as fast jet pilots. Well, first of all, it's ridiculous. Why? Why would you need more women as fast jet pilots? What's it got to do with anything? It's got to be a meritocracy if you're flying an F-35, at Mach 900. You really want the bloke at the helm to be
the best.
The best, don't you? Not putting on his lippy. If you're trans, putting on his lippy, et cetera, et cetera. So it really doesn't work. So it has to be a meritocracy. The armed forces must return to a meritocracy. And you'll find that view in the sergeant's mess. I was always more popular in the sergeant's mess when I got invited. You had to be invited, of course. I got on with sergeant. My mother was a sergeant in the WAF in the war. I like NCOs. I like the straightforward common sense you get from NCOs. They've got through the ranks. They haven't slipped in because they went to university and they make the right noises and suddenly they're a captain. Bullshit. That is bullshit, believe me. So they've had to do a bit of soldiering before they get promoted. So we've got all these things and it slipped. It's difficult. The question is where to start. Where do we start? The country's gone so far down the lavatory, I don't know where to start.
What would you have done, or what would you do if you was PM or king or somebody with extreme influence and power? How would you have dealt with the grooming gangs? Because it's not been dealt with rightly, is it?
No, it hasn't been dealt with at all.
No.
It's very difficult. This is what happens when you were talking earlier about, you get a ghetto or you get a whole town, Bradford or places like this, where that digs itself in, that kind of, I know that you'll have to bleep this out, gangs, otherwise, it won't go through.
That's what they are.
That's what they are. God, we all know what they are. But of course, who was involved. And was it just, we all know who it was, but I don't believe it was just that. I think there are problems with senior police officers and senior politicians. I think everybody, because it does seem, does it not? I could be wrong on this. Politics seems to attract weird people, attracted to children or attracted to underage, all this kind of thing. I mean, I'm just a bloke from the rugby club. I like girls, me, and I think if they got blonde hair and big boobs, that's all right with me, But these weirdos who like children and all the rest of these pedos, I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know any in my social life, but then you wouldn't necessarily know, would you, who's what? But it seems to me that a very high percentage, and of course Sonia Poulton pointed this out on her channel. She's got a whole list of people who are on watch for paedophilia. And of course, nobody's allowed to talk to it. It's a taboo subject because we don't know who else is involved in this. And I think it goes a lot deeper and further and wider than we might imagine, which is why I think there's been no serious inquiry. And again, Rupert Lowe being proactive, which is why I like Rupert Lowe, he's raised money to have his own inquiry. He's raised £500,000. Let's look into it. Why isn't everybody else saying that? And again, it brings you back a little bit, does it not, to the, it's already platitudes from the senior members of Reform. You expect platitudes from the Tories and the Labour Party, but why? It's a bit platitudinous, isn't it, when you get to these things? Why is it not being 100% supported? I could very well be wrong because it's only 24 hours old, but I want to know, where's the leadership of Reform campaigning for the release of Lucy Connolly? And we know what their view was of Tommy Robinson. That lot, Reformer,
Mr.
the leader,
Tice.
yeah, that lot. Well, that lot with their Union Jacks voted Reform. Mr. Tice, who, let's be frank, is not the sharpest pencil in the box, is he? Let's be frank.
He lost my vote when he said that.
Masterly inactivity would have worked, wouldn't it? He didn't need to say anything. He could have just shut up, couldn't he? But he couldn't shut up. He's got no political nous at all.
And if we went to war, he'd soon love that lot, wouldn't he?
Oh,
he'd need that lot.
Exactly. But, these guys, you see them on TV where they're scripted and they've got this and they've been briefed by their people and all the rest of it. Believe me, I've seen it from the other side. I know all about this, the briefings and how you handle this kind of thing. But I've met them over drinks. I've met them at dinners and I met them with these people, with no cameras around.
Yeah.
And I can tell you they are fundamentally stupid people. They're thick.
It's worrying.
Oh, yeah, it is.
It is Parliament pantomime. Like, for example, if I was the opposition and I was opposite Keir Starmer, I wouldn't be able to have a cosy chat in the hallway with him. It's like, no, you are opposition. I don't like you or what you stand for. So do they play up to the cameras? And off camera, is it like handshakes and drinks?
I think that's largely true. But of course, I was always under a little bit of pressure when I was a member of the European Parliament because there were one or two people there that I had to be very careful with because I'm not as bad now as I used to be. But certainly when I was young and even 15 years ago, you push me too far, I will give you a slap. One or two people there, I nearly crossed the floor and just punched because I thought this is going to make me feel so much better. But of course, that's less than helpful, really, in politics. So you have to use the rapier rather than the right hand. But no, they're all ghastly. My view is they are nearly all dreadful. They're nearly all dreadful, and I don't care what rosette they're wearing. I think there are one or two exceptions in perhaps out of 650 odd members of Parliament, I think probably 5, 6, 7, 8 who are okay.
All the rest not trustworthy.
Why don't they ever go into a pub and listen to what people think? They don't. They go into a pub at election time and they're seen drinking a pint. And out of shot is their Chateau Neuf du Pape is over, which is what they really drink. So they've got their pint and it's going to the pub. So why are so many pubs closing if they're in favour of the pub and going to the pub? And of course they don't like pubs because that's where we talk. That's where people like you and I talk, isn't it? We like a sherbet, and we exchange ideas. And that they don't like that. They want us at home watching TV, which they control, drinking beer from Sainsbury's, which is highly representative in the House of Lords of the Labour Party. and donations and all the rest of it. And of course, Congress is the same, as we know, in America. It's all about the Congress, who are all in receipt of the industrial military complex subsidies. You know, they're all doing very nicely. And I haven't been to Washington for a while, but I used to go to Washington a fair bit and, you know, meet people and give the occasional speech or whatever it is. It's quite fascinating when you go to Washington. And I was friend of Doug McGregor, Colonel Doug McGregor, who was on my channel, great bloke. He said, Godfrey, you wouldn't recognise Washington now. The houses have all doubled in size. The swimming pools all doubled in size. They're all congressmen who came from the sticks with no money in their pocket. And now they're wealthy. And how did they get wealthy?
Yeah. Well, a couple more questions. And this may seem like an obvious question, but maybe it's not to some. What's the definition of fascism, and are we living in a fascist state?
Yes, and I wrote an article about this, and I did a recent podcast on this. And I don't use the word in any pejorative term, because it's what fascism has been something that student unions, they shout, or opposition people they shout fascist as a sort of swear word, you know, and that's not how it is at all. Fascism is a political doctrine. And put simplistically, and it's amazing how many people came back when I did this video who still don't understand it. The trouble is when you do a video or something and you refer people to a written work, they don't. They go, you know. What they can't do is actually sit down and do some homework and then tweet, you know, because many of them are morons. But the problem is that you need to do some homework. What is it? Fundamentally, it's an unholy alliance between big business, banks and the state. And that's what it was. And the biggest perpetrator of it really was Mussolini. I'm not saying that he's right or wrong, or that's good or that bad, because that's a whole different kind of debate, long debate. But that's what we've got. Who would argue that what we have now is not a conspiracy of banks, politicians and big business? It's screaming at you if you can't see it. That is the definition of fascism. Some people, communism. No, that's a misunderstanding. Communism is the ownership of the means of production. Fascism is the control of means of production, which they do by regulation. So your water authority, your gas company, everything's regulated. The City of London is regulated, investment is regulated, and all the rest of it. Of course, this is what people hide behind and I know something about this, in the city. When Equitable Life went under, some of their people had given very bad advice to people, and I was trying to unscramble it when I was still in business. And the response that they would make is, we just passed a regulatory inspection, so there can't be anything wrong. And this file's been marked as being passed. So you get a young teenager virtually comes along and represents the FSA, and he looks at the file and he ticks boxes. He ticks the boxes. Is it in the right place? Is it on the front of the file? He doesn't have the experience or knowledge to say, was that advice good or bad? For example, this particular one, sorry to bore all your listeners, but was a breach of the advantages of the 1970 Income and Corporation Taxes Act regarding pensions. And he'd taken somebody out of it to move somewhere else, which meant it was left unprotected. Now, I know that. I knew that. The little man from the FSA didn't know that. He'd just left university, bless him, hasn't started shaving. So they would say, look, we passed. And we had all this, of course, in 2008, didn't we, when everything went out? There was Moody's and Standard & Poor. And Moody's says, these bonds are okay, these bonds are AAA or AA. And the fund managers, also hadn't started bloody shaving, decided that, look, I bet they were AA. Standard & Poor and Moody's all said they were AA, so I was under our rules of our trust that we could invest in them. Well, you look at it yourself. I didn't, when I was managing money, I didn't invest in anything because the regulatory said it was all right. I looked myself. I had a look. Is this bond sound? You know, these bonds, are they sound? And I knew that some of the American bonds were talking about these bonds are mortgage bonds, and so they're doctors' houses and professors' houses in Arlington, 90% of the property is XYZ, but it wasn't that at all. It was trailers in South Chicago. But nobody could be bothered to actually dig down, particularly people running pension funds for councils, corporate, running those sort of. They didn't bother because they're idiots. And they wouldn't get away with it in the city because they're too stupid. And so who has to do that? Well, the government steps in with the taxpayer who doesn't have an index-linked pension because only the men from the council or the civil service have index-linked pensions these days, and they're left out in the cold. The whole thing's corrupt. It's rancid.
Yeah. What do you think currently is the biggest threat to Britain?
Gosh.
If you can pick one.
Okay, if I can only pick one, I would say the abandonment of a free press.
And who owns the press?
Who indeed? Who indeed? Not us, is it? It's not people who buy newspapers. It's shady people globally. I read an article, I can't remember the detail, but I suspect that your listeners and viewers on your channel are pretty wick, as we say in Yorkshire, and they can look it up for themselves. But I think I'm right in saying that all Western media is owned by 8 corporations. 8. So you have the same old names coming up, don't you? BlackRock, Vanguard, Bill Gates, all these things. So that's who they own. And this is why you get your editorial.
When you said the abandonment of free press, that was a real good answer. Could you just expand on that slightly, what you meant by the abandonment of free press?
Well, I include electronic media in that. I include BBC and Sky and all the rest of it. The problem.
And what is free press?
Well, a free press is the freedom of editorial, which historically would look at the freedom of editorial, which means that your editor, W.T. Stead, I think it was, of the Times, before the Great War, I think it was. My memory is being severely tested now as an old geezer. But if you had these editors which were publish and be damned, and now we're under editorial pressure, which is why the BBC has collapsed virtually, because nobody believes anything that's said anymore, because they're all politicians who only got to see quite recently that Rupert Lowe interview with Emily Maitlis. No mates.
That was actually disgusting what she'd done.
I mean, she's just appalling. And of course, so who did she humiliate? She humiliated herself. She humiliated the BBC. And she's continued to do that. And these people get big salaries. Laura Cheeseburger's on £400,000 of blood a year with the BBC. Somebody, hey, email me, people out there. When did Laura Cheeseburger ever ask an apposite question of a politician? Ever in her career? Answer, no. Yeah, send me.
Final question. Something about the past that you miss, or things about the past that you miss?
I follow a channel which is England of yesteryear or something. It's not political. It's silent, I think it is. It's colour. It's colour of yesteryear, families on holiday at the beach and stuff like that. When Dad and Mum had a Morris 1000 Woody, and there's 2 kids in the back, and they've got the picnic and all that kind of thing. And if you look at things like the doctor programs, the early doctor programs with Dirk Bogarde in them as well, and the nurse and the matron and all that kind of thing, and the NHS and the commitment that they had there, and schools where you face the front. It doesn't matter whether it's a public school, a grammar school or a state school. You face the front and you did your told and you learnt. And a grammar school, of course, gave people, working class kids, an opportunity to break out, to get to Oxbridge. And you'd be surprised, I expect some of your listeners know, the number of kids who went to grammar school in senior positions in all fields who broke out by going to grammar school. Won't have a good word to say with them now. Talk about pull the ladder up, Jack. They all went to grammar schools, did very well, and now they're anti-grammar school for some extraordinary reason. So that, and when I look at those, and I look at the no immigration of any kind, pretty much. So you knew, if you're in that little market town, you were all, how can I say, cousins under the skin, as it were. You knew, for example, that if you were a child and you got lost an adult would come to your aid straight away. He wouldn't hang back because he might be thought he'd be accused of being a paedophile or a kiddie fiddler or something like that. You would see always a bobby on the beat with a proper hat, and he would be known to the local community, and he'd live in the local police house. None of this is rocket science, is it? It's all so easy. And now the only time you see a policeman is coming up the path, or a motorist. In fact, when they don't even see motorists, it's all cameras, isn't it, these days? When did they do any real policing? Getting back to the days of, historically, of Robert Peel, Sir Robert Peel, it was crime prevention. It wasn't reaction. There was a bobby on the beat everywhere to prevent crime, not to react to crime when it had happened. That's not difficult. How difficult is that? And I'd get rid of the police colleges at Hendon. I'd halve the civil service. Whenever you look at the number of civil servants that we had when we had an empire, the biggest empire that the world's ever seen, red all over the map. In my view, a good thing, but there we are. You'll find that we had no more people working for in the public sector civil service then as we do now. In fact, fewer. And one asks oneself now, what do they all do? We have somewhere in the region, I think it's 7 million people are in the public sector, and we have another 6 million people who are economically not registered, so they don't work at all. Round about 13 million people, all sucking at the tit. How much tax do they lay on us to pay for all these buggers? That's what I'd like to know. That's before we get to overseas aid and the Ukraine and all the rest of it. So we've got billions and billions of money pouring out all over the place. Whoever talks about fiscal responsibility? We went to a national election just a year. When did you last hear anybody talking about the national debt in a Westminster election in the last 40 years? Well, you haven't, because they haven't. Nobody talks about it. They think they can get out of it by growth. Oh, we're going to grow the economy. So consequently, we've seen the pound now go from, and the dollar's in trouble. But when I was a kid, a dollar, you got $3.50 to a pound. Now you get 1.3, and the dollar's shit. So sound money. All these things aren't difficult, and they've been taken away largely because the political system that we have can't get you out of it. You vote red or blue. I mean, if it just use an analogy here, if I may, you go into a curry shop, go into a curry house. I'm very partial, I have to say, to a curry. You have chicken vindaloo or meat madras, don't you? Or whatever it is, all jolly good stuff. But you can't get egg and chips. Now, what we have a system now is it's like a curry house. You can have meat madras, you can have chicken vindaloo, you can have pilau rice and all the rest of it. And you say, no, just a minute, I want eggs and bacon. It's not on the menu. And the problem we have at the moment, it's not on the menu what we want, which is why there's a huge gap here for reform. People are begging for a new political party. And I'm sorry to say this, but I know a lot of people will be reform voters. I did advocate, I advocated reform. But when they got rid of Rupert Lowe and they got rid of Ben Habib, I don't think I trust the buggers, to be frank. We have a Goldman Sachs chairman of reform, Goldman Sachs, like Sunak, and we used to call them in the city years ago the vampire squid, because you knew that if they were Goldman Sachs, they weren't looking out for you. And there's been too much Goldman Sachs influence, or JP Morgan, or these major investors. I used to work for one. I know exactly how they work. They can buy and sell anybody, especially politicians who are for sale. Most politicians are for sale. That's one of the reasons I like Rupert Lowe. You can't buy him. You can't buy Rupert Lowe. He's got enough money of his own. You couldn't buy me at a much smaller level. I didn't take the salary as an MEP. I didn't take the allowances, attendance allowances. I devoted all those to small Yorkshire charities, all on record. I didn't take any of this. I didn't take any bungs. I didn't take any freebies. I didn't take any of them because I felt, being a small party like UKIP, I had to stand above it. if you will. And we all agreed that. We all shook hands on that, all 13 UKIP MEPs. And then where did I find that had been broken? In the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail. It had been broken. No names, no pack drill. Who had their wife on the ticket? No names, no pack drill. Look it up.
I will do. And you also took no notice. Godfrey, where can people find you on the social media platforms?
Some of my stuff is very difficult to find. I'm shadow banned.
Okay, we'll put your links in our description. And if you're watching this without looking at the links, just type in Godfrey Bloom and you will find a plethora of stuff that you've done.
Yeah.
And are you on X?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we'll put your X description in as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to say before we wrap this up?
No, I think I've said it all.
Yeah. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I'm really, really grateful that you took the time to travel all this way to come and spend some time with me.
It's been a great pleasure. A great pleasure.
Yeah, and I wish you nothing but the best and joy and good health, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.